Welcome to the Autoimmune Doc podcast. As always, this is your host, Dr. Taylor Krick, and I love breaking down and explaining the mechanisms behind chronic and complex conditions. And today's episode is about the thyroid, and for being such a simple little organ, there's quite a gland, rather. There's quite a bit of complex, physiology behind thyroid. And so that's why a lot of people, you've heard their labs look normal, but they've still got thyroid symptoms. So we're going to talk through this. My co-host is Ryan A. Allen. So if you haven't heard him on any of the past episodes, Ryan's beginning to join me on the podcast as some help with our social media direction and things like that, but also just asking some questions and guiding some of these conversations, because Ryan, as he'll tell you, has his own autoimmune journey. So he's pretty knowledgeable because of his own journey that he's been through. And then he also owns a lab testing company. So he's really knowledgeable in like the functional space and things. But I also think, Ryan, you ask questions from a little more of a layperson, a little more of a patient perspective. So I think you ask me good questions and then I try to answer them. But that's our goal today, is like everything thyroid. The other thing that I'll say too, before I let Ryan talk, I've got thyroid issues. I talk about that in the past. We touch on it, but I haven't spent a lot of time on it, because even for the last couple of years, I haven't been as good as at keeping up on my labs. Now this year, I have been, and my thyroid is my major target that I've been working on. So I could share some of that, but I'm also in the middle of working on some of these. But I just have personal experience with thyroid. It's not nearly as common in a male as it is in a female, but sure enough, here I am, and it's not impossible. But all those things give me, some knowledge and expertise on thyroid, because I've worked with, hundreds, if not thousands. I mean, it's got to be thousands. I mean, it's got to be thousands of hypothyroid patients or Hashimoto's patients. So I've worked with, hundreds and hundreds of people, and my own personal journey, and taken hours and hours and hours of seminars and all these things. So that's Ryan's job, is to wring some of that information out of me that's helpful for you guys. So Ryan, why don't you say hi, and I'll stop rambling.
Hello, guys. Well, thank you for tuning in today. I think my job, as Dr. Taylor said, is just to play the patient. I'm someone with my own autoimmune journey, and I'm just gonna sit in that role today and ask the questions that a typical patient would, and that I'm curious about. So, Dr. Taylor, what are the three things you see most commonly with thyroid? Because there's hypo, there's hyper, and there's a million things in between.
Yeah. So let me go in order of like rarest to most common. Most rare, hyper. Now, as an autoimmune specialist, I do see it. It's just not nearly as common. I mean that statistically, like literally, but also like coming into my practice, it's not nearly as common. But some of the stories that I have of hyperthyroid are like great stories, like people who were on the verge of getting their thyroid removed, and long story short, never had to. We're able to avoid that, and their labs normalized and things like that. So I've got a couple good healing stories of hyper, but that one's by far the most rare. The second one is hypo. Super common, but most people are already medicated. And so they come into me and they're like, I was diagnosed 20 years ago with hypothyroid, and I've been on levothyroxine for 20 years. And I've been on the same dose, or they've increased it, or whatever their, medication journey is. Or a lot of times they'll be like, I started on levo and then went to Armour, and then my insurance changed and they had to change me to NP thyroid, and like whatever. They've got a medication journey that they I want to ask them about. But that's hypo. Now, occasionally I see somebody that's hypo and they're not medicated. And then it's like, well, crap, we got to get your thyroid back on track, or you need medication. That's where I've been at right now in 2026 too, is like my thyroid was low, like lower than it had been in the past. And it's like, oh crap, if I don't get this back on track, I'm going to need medication. And that's also too, Ryan, that's what I believe. I'm very anti-medication in all senses, but you need thyroid hormone. Every cell in your body needs thyroid hormone. You cannot function and heal and do metabolism and things like that without it. So like if I were hypothyroid and I'm not able to solve that, I would resort to taking thyroid meds, and it'd be the only med that I take, and it'd be the only, I've hardly ever taken hardly any meds. But I'm not opposed to that. But I also have faith that we can fix it too, or that I can fix, mine. But that's the second most common, is hypo. The third most common is, let's say, mystery. Like somebody has Hashimoto's, which is thyroid autoimmunity, but their labs are normal. Their labs are good, meaning their thyroid hormone is good. So then if they have symptoms, they're like, is this because of my thyroid or is this because my autoimmunity? Sometimes the thyroid gland is doing a fine job producing hormones. It's producing a lot. You got a lot of thyroid hormones. You can measure that really easily. And it's like, oh, you got a lot. But the immune system is attacking the gland. And so that's a concern because sometimes just the autoimmunity that's involved with that can cause a bunch of symptoms, you know? It can cause, brain fog, fatigue, pain, inflammatory symptoms, gut issues, but you test your thyroid and your thyroid is fine, so replacing thyroid hormone isn't what needs to be done, but calming autoimmunity is. So I don't know what we'd call it, silent Hashimoto's all the time, or I see people who maybe don't have perfect labs, but they're not hypothyroid yet. So they're like kind of in that middle space, or they've got all the thyroid symptoms. So they think they have thyroid issues. And everything on Google and the internet and the Instagram says, "Oh, you got thyroid because you got weight gain and you're losing your hair and you're tired." But sometimes they've checked everything thyroid and it's like maybe it's not your thyroid. What else could it be? But hyper, hypo, and somewhere in between would be the type 3 people that I see.
Let's break down hypo because it's incredibly prevalent. It seems like everybody knows someone in their life with hypothyroid. Um, so let's say someone comes into your office and they are that individual that you mentioned, that let's say they got diagnosed with Hashimoto's 20 years ago and they've been on medication and they don't love taking medication like you laid out. Um, they want to eventually maybe get off of it and they want to take a more holistic approach to fixing their thyroid. How do you advise them in that process?
Cautiously. Because if you've been on med for 20 years, your thyroid might not ever kick back on. It's kinda like if you've been walking on with crutches for 20 years, you probably ain't gonna be getting back to marathon running anytime soon. Like, you've gotten so used to crutches that your legs might not work the way they used to or whatever we wanna say. So it's totally possible, it's totally probable that somebody needs to be on medication because either the thyroid is damaged enough that it ain't gonna work again. It's kinda like your tires. If your tires are worn down enough, you're not putting rubber back on them. You gotta put a new tire on, it doesn't work in both ways. So there is the possibility that somebody needs to stay on their thyroid hormone, but it's also like, even if that's the case, it's like, let's work on everything else. Let's look at, I don't wanna say the basics, but like the low-hanging fruit. Let's look at your vitamin D. Let's look at your omega-3s. I talk about that so much because so often I find that people aren't picking the low-hanging fruit. They're like, "It's parasites, is it heavy metals, is it toxins?" I'm like, "You're vitamin D deficient. You're never gonna solve this if you're vitamin D deficient." I saw this girl the other day, and I don't wanna ramble too much, but she's got crazy serious stuff. She just had a stroke. She's my age. She had a COVID-induced stroke, and she's got Hashi's. But her vitamin D is like, I don't know, 14 or something. And I'm like, vitamin D is not gonna fix this, but you cannot do it without it. But so some of those low-hanging fruits, that's what we look at. Let's look at the gut. So I see a ton of people that are on thyroid hormone, and I'm like, "Hey, maybe you should stay on your thyroid hormone. Let's work on everything else." And then they're like, "Boy, I feel great. I've got less headaches, I've got less brain fog, I've lost 5 pounds, I'm less bloated." They're symptomatically, they're feeling better. So going back to your original question, we approach that cautiously. I don't tell people, "Stop your thyroid meds." I never It's not legal for me to do that. And I tell people too, it's like, your medication is outside of my scope to tell you that you should change it or what you should do about it. I can give people some thoughts and some suggestions, and they can bring that to their prescriber. Like, "Hey, have you ever considered, Armour, or have you ever considered a T3, T4 combo, or have you considered getting this compounded?" So I can give people considerations, but I approach meds cautiously no matter what because it's not within my scope. So I'm like, "Hey, maybe you need it, maybe you don't. Let's work like heck to see if we can get off of it, and if you can't, it's not the end of the world, and if you can, great." I've had tons of people get off their thyroid hormone and maintain normal labs. Period. I've also had people get off their thyroid hormone, and a month or 2 later, we're like, "Oh, crap, you need to go back on it." And that's another thing too when I say cautiously, is like you work on everything else, you see what happens, but then if somebody chooses to not take their thyroid anymore or their prescriber is okay with that, you darn well better be keeping an eye on it. Because sometimes you're like, "I feel fine without my thyroid hormone. I feel great. I don't think I ever needed it in the first place." And in the background, their TSH is going up to 30 or 60 or something like that. It's like, "Oh, crap, you better keep an eye on that." Because sometimes the labs and the symptoms, there's a lag time. There's a lag time where somebody's like, "I feel great," even though their numbers are dropping. Or somebody's, like, "I feel like crap," even though their numbers are normal. There's a lag time, so doing repeat labs and cyclical labs is important too, which is another, not that you asked this, right, but, like, the top mistakes that I see people make in general is probably, like, not picking the low-hanging fruit and not following up on their labs often enough. So, like, for me, I'm about to order my 3rd set of labs this year. And it's March right now, so I don't know when we're gonna release this, probably soon, but I did labs in January, I did labs in February, and I'm gonna do labs again in March, and I'm gonna do labs again in April, I guarantee it, and I'm gonna keep doing them just to see what the trends are, all my trends are improving, but they're not out of the woods yet, so I wanna keep an eye on those trends, and I don't think people do labs often enough a lot of times, or they do, like, $1,500 of labs one time. And then they're like, "Why am I not getting better?" It's like, I'd rather see you do $100 labs for 15 months in a row than do 1,500 in January and then wonder why you're not getting better in June. But all those things now I don't even remember what your question was, but that's if somebody comes in with hypo and they're on meds, we're not messing with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have a preference in the sense of, obviously you're not recommending meds wise anything to people, but like just if you were in those shoes, which one of those medications? Because there are a few different options from Armour to some of the other ones that you laid out.
Yeah, my short answer might be different than what people expect is no. I don't have a preference because, and again, I think that as somebody that's naturally minded, as somebody that's anti-drug, anti-surgery, all those things, doesn't do it for myself, doesn't give it to my kids kind of person, there's nothing wrong with Synthroid. Everybody out there thinks like, "Well, it's synthetic. I need something natural. I need something bioidentical." And it's like, that might sound trendy and right, and it sometimes is. So sometimes Synthroid has some downsides or has some fillers or has some things, somebody might on Instagram might hear this and be like, "This guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Synthroid is the devil." No, it's not, and I don't see that, and that's why millions of people worldwide are on it with no problem. Synthroid works pretty well. But sometimes if somebody's like their T3 is low and their T4 is high, that's a conversion issue. There's all these different patterns in the thyroid, Ryan, that like I've taken a bunch of thyroid education from Dr. Karazian, like probably 50 hours of continuing ed from Karazian, but he goes into all these different details of what the meds have, what's included in them. So I'd have to bone up on it to even give you a better answer. But if somebody's thyroid T3 is low and their T4 is normal, they might need a T3 T4 combo. Or some people will be on like a leothyroid. Is it leothyronine? It's like it's a T3, and they might be on a, I don't know, like the a lot of practitioners that I see even in the natural world, they try to get fancy with like compounding and they're like, "We're gonna give you this much T3 and this much T4." And in my opinion, I've seen way more people that are on like a roller coaster of thyroid hormones. Whereas a lot of people, it's like, here's your levothyroxine dose, and it's like str- a flat line. And then like say 5 years from now, they might have to bump up the dosage. So we want to avoid that. But I think that a lot of the times that I've seen people, it's like I started on Synthroid and I was on it for 5 years. Then I went to a natural doctor who said I need to go on NP or Armour, and I got a million symptoms. And then they started increasing my T3 or decreasing my T4 or increasing this, and it's like, and I've been on this roller coaster ever since. And that's kind of how I feel with hormone replacement in general too, is like the more tricky and nuanced you try to get, the more it jacks things up, I would say, like with estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, I'm not a big fan of those replacements. I think that hormones are an effect more than a cause. So I'm more like work on the causes, detoxify and work on the gut and stress and all those things. But I don't have a preference medication. Now, for me, if I need a thyroid hormone, Ryan, because again, not to try to put that toothpaste back in the tube, but if I need a thyroid hormone replacement, I'm gonna probably do some careful looking and do some more research and like look into it. And I might go for something like Armour or Thyroid. So I do steer towards more natural things over synthetic, but I don't see a big problem with Synthroid, even though it gets demonized in the natural world. And if Synthroid was my best option, I'd be like, okay, give me Synthroid, let's see what happens. But I might try something like Armour. And I used to have like all the like numbers and things memorized of like what they all are, and this one's this many grains, or this one's this percentage, or this one's this, bioidentical breakdown. I don't right now just because it's not top of mind to me. But if I had to go on Synthroid, I would not be that discouraged. I'd be discouraged because I have to go on a med, but I'm not that scared of Synthroid. Synthroid also, just FYI, is T4. Synthetic T4, and that's what they do. That's the gold standard for 90% of people, and it works well for them. But it's T4, and T4 is the inactive form of thyroid. It has to be converted to the active form of thyroid, and so you hear a lot of people out there talking about this. It's like, oh, if you're hypothyroid, it's got to be your conversion. It's like, well, let me see the labs. You can measure T4 and measure T3, and you can find conversion patterns in people all the time. It is true. But what if you don't have that pattern? You might take a Armour thyroid with T3 in it, and you get heart palpitations and insomnia, and you lose 10 pounds. And it's like, oh, that ain't good for you. So there are some nuances to that in the conversion process and the labs and things like that. Um, but yeah,
And so when it comes to labs, what type of labs do you like to do if you're seeing somebody who has hypothyroid?
kind of depends on what they have.
Mhm.
So you'll be shocked to hear that I have a nuanced answer. But a lot of people have good enough thyroid labs, meaning if they've got here's the common. Let's say this. Let's start backwards. Like, what does the doctors look at? TSH and T4 typically, because that's how they dictate. Do you have hypothyroid? Yes or no. TSH, and is your levothyroxine dosage correct? Yes or no. So that's why insurance covers TSH and T4. Now, a more, let's say, savvy doc might add on T3, or might add on a couple other markers. But in the conventional system, they're usually doing 2, 3 markers at the most, maybe for the first time you're in or something like that. Or an endocrinologist might do free T3 or free T4, but they're very rarely doing a full panel. So a full thyroid panel to me would be TSH, T4, T3, free T4, free T3, Hashimoto's antibodies, reverse T3, and maybe a T3 uptake, because that all just gives it, they're all just different markers. Like, what if you got a lot of T3, but you're not getting good uptake? Well, that could be affected by estrogen, testosterone, other things. But it's like sometimes you can't. How could you see that? If you're like, hey, you got a good T3, it's like, why do I feel like crap? Well, maybe you're not uptaking it, or maybe you got a lot of total T3. But then how do you know if it's free T3 or reverse T3? You got to look at the whole puzzle. And there's however many I just named, there's about 10 parts to a full thyroid panel. So let's say somebody comes to me with every thyroid symptom under the sun, and they're like, I don't know what's going on. And I'm like, has anybody ever checked your thyroid? They're like, no. Then I'd be doing all those. Very rarely is somebody coming to me like that. Usually they're coming to me like, hey, I got my thyroid checked and I was hypothyroid, and they put me on this med, but now I feel worse. Like, I'm not usually their step one. Or even if they've gone the natural route or the alternative route, they've had labs. So I'm like, let's see where it's currently at. Let's see where these numbers are at. But a full thyroid panel is what I want to see with thyroid. Now, I also want to see, like, if we're going to do blood labs, we're doing a CBC, we're doing a metabolic panel, we're doing vitamin D, we're looking at their omegas, we're looking at their homocysteine, their C-reactive protein, their iron, Maybe their vitamin A, I don't do that every time, but vitamin A is just particularly important for thyroid. So we're looking for other things, but if you're just saying if we want to see how the thyroid is working, we look at thyroid labs, and it's hard to solve a 10-piece puzzle with only 3 of the pieces.
Such a great point. And the beauty about the thyroid blood labs that you just suggested is that although some of those aren't covered by insurance, they're not that expensive.
Right. That's
Um,
why I don't do though, like I don't do TSH receptor or thyroid stimulating immunoglobulins. I think those are the same alias, but they're expensive. So like even in the labs that I run, if you ask me sometimes, well, why do you do that one and not do that one? Sometimes it's straight up because of the cost. So, if it's an expensive marker, I don't do it that often. If it's a $20 vitamin D marker, I do it all the time. Or a $20 homocysteine, I do it all the time. Bang for the buck is an important thing for me. It doesn't mean that we, cut any corners with care, but it's like at what cost are we getting these answers? And there's a certain point where it's like you're paying too much for the answers you're getting.
yep. And oftentimes, when somebody is hypothyroid, let's say they're taking their medication, they're in range, but there's still symptoms going on, whether that is hair loss or weight gain. What are your steps by steps there? So it's the first one is low hanging fruit. And then what are like the component elements to that low hanging fruit? I know you mentioned vitamin D, omegas, anything else there? And then what are those next steps after you kind of cross off those?
Yeah, so good call. So first off, the symptoms can be confusing too because like even for me, like I was straight up hypothyroid in January. My TSH was high, my thyroid was low. It's like my labs were not good, but I felt great. Like I'm not overweight. In fact, I'm skinny. I would love to put on weight. My hairline ain't what it used to be, but it is not like losing. Outer third of my eyebrows would be my most evident thyroid symptom. But it's like I felt great. I'm going to the gym every day. I'm like skiing. I'm like not your typical thyroid like dragon, kind of person. So the symptoms can be confusing in both directions. But when people come to me in general, the first thing that I'm looking at is mechanisms. What are the mechanisms? And meaning like of your symptoms. So there's one, you know, questionnaire that I use, Ryan, that is, we do like an extensive paperwork, and an extensive intake form, but there's one that's called a metabolic assessment form. And there's categories. So it's like if you check a bunch of boxes in category 8, that's the thyroid category or whatever. I might be saying that wrong. But category 9 is the adrenal category. Category 2 is like the gut category. So right away before I even meet somebody, I'm like, "Ooh, wonder what's going on with your gut. You got bloating, constipation, gas, like wonder what's going on with your gut." So right away, the first thing that I'm looking at is what are your mechanisms? Regardless of labs, regardless of low-hanging fruit, what are your mechanisms? And so if somebody comes into me, I'm like, "Your mechanisms sound like thyroid. Have you ever had your thyroid checked? And do you have any of these signs or symptoms?" And if they've never had it checked, it's like, "We want to look at that." Or your mechanisms sound like gut. Have you ever had your gut checked? Okay, we want to look at that. So the mechanisms are cueing me into what we need to start supporting and what we need to look further into. So when I work with somebody, we're doing that step one. Because if we order thyroid labs or we order gut labs or we order, toxin labs or whatever, they might take a few weeks to get back. So we're not like sitting by idly. We're like, let's start working on these mechanisms. And like, for example, I had this lady who was in today and we just met 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago. And she was like, I think I'm doing better already. I was like, "Good. That's what I hope." But the first round of supplements we put her on were more for histamine, because that was a mechanism that I thought was involved for her. And now today we got our labs back, and it was like, "Hey, you got H. pylori, you got all these food sensitivities, you got leaky gut, you got, blah, blah, blah." So that's where I'm starting is with the mechanism of what I think is going on. And then we're looking for what are the again, like I would say a lot of times I'll draw this out of like short term, middle term, long term. The short term things when I meet somebody are like, let's do this right away. Let's start targeting inflammation. Let's take some anti-inflammatories. Let's start targeting your nervous system. Let's take some anti-anxieties things. Let's start targeting your histamine. Let's take some antihistamine things. And then the middle term is like what's going on in your gut or what's going on with the detox. And the reason those are middle term is because we don't have to do them forever. But gut health, you might work on it for 2, 3 months. And then it's like, hey, good. Your yeast is gone and your microbiome is balanced and your leaky gut is fixed. And detox, same thing. You might do it for 2, 3 months. You can do either one of those for more, but it just doesn't happen overnight. And it doesn't have to be a year or something like that either. And then in the long term is more the low hanging fruit. So then I might say, like, hey, if your vitamin D is low, it's like, well, none of this is going to work without that. Or if you're under too much stress, it's like none of this is going to work without that. Or if you live in mold, it's like none of this is going to work without that for sure. So we're looking for those long-term things while we address middle term and short term. And so that's again just kind of how I put things into order of like first steps, second steps, third steps. And even again for this lady this morning, it was almost like an afterthought because she's got an inflammatory skin issue. And she's, been up to Mayo and had all this lab work and done all this stuff, and nobody's able to help her with her inflammatory skin issue. They put her on prednisone, and it helps, but other than that, they're like, "Well, we don't know." And I told her today, I was like, "Your omegas are low." But I was like, "That might not matter right now. The gut stuff matters right now, but in the long term, you might wanna add that in and do that for a long time because it takes some time to raise omegas and you need to take them at fairly high doses and things like that. And I said it helps with a little bit of everything. They resolve inflammation. They're good for brain health and avoiding Alzheimer's. They're good for arterial flexibility and heart health. But if they're low, we just want them to be high. So we might be doing short term, middle term, and long term all at the same time. Or we might be kind of picking and choosing and saying, hey, these omegas matter, but they don't matter today. Today, we got to get you out of your inflammatory flare and then we can raise your omegas or your D or things like that. Those D and omegas, those low hanging fruits are like always relevant. My low hanging fruit that I would say is D's, B's, and omega 3s. If there's lab signs for those. If there's not lab signs for those, I'm like, why are you taking a B vitamin? Not to say there's there's nothing wrong with the B vitamin. It does everything. But we're like trying to solve problems. And if you're taking something for a problem that might not be there, then it ain't solving your problems. It's just a good thing to do. Uh, but those are the kind of the action steps when somebody comes to me is again very nuanced because a lot of people have boatloads of labs and boatloads of supplements, but we want to make sure that we're hitting all three of those areas. And we do that with quite frankly with a lot of success. I would say if anything, like if you ask me like what is the condition that I feel the most success with, it's it's Hashimoto's for sure. Because a lot of people get to the point where they're like, I feel pretty good. I just have this Hashimoto's process in my body, but the brain fog, the bloating, the fatigue that I came in with, I no longer have. Um, yeah. I also say too, while I'm rambling about it, the two most common things that I see root cause wise in thyroid and Hashimoto's are yeast in the gut and methylation issues. Now, whether that's, oh, I got MTHFR or not, we'll see it on like an oat test, or we'll see it on a homocysteine, or we'll see it on an MCV, which is a anemia marker. But we'll see like, oh, you got some methylation issues, and we'll just leave it at that. But those are by far the two most common things that I see.
And what do you do for those methylation issues? Because the gut issues are a
Give
little
'em
bit
B
more
vitamins.
straightforward, it seems. It's give B vitamins.
Yeah, give them B vitamins generally, depending on the person, because if they're like, oh, I tried B vitamins and they wrecked me. So sometimes I don't, because some people are very, very sensitive to certain Bs. But the short answer is give them B vitamins and see if the numbers change. Because then instead of like, do I take Seeking Health B vitamin? Do I take this other one do I take Cellcore? Do I take this brand? Whatever. It's like this is numbers based. And it's whatever gets this MCV down. It's whatever gets this homocysteine down. It's whatever changes these numbers or helps you feel better. Otherwise, why are we doing it? Otherwise, and it's not a bad idea to take B vitamins. They do everything in the body. But they're made by the gut. A lot of them are made by the gut. So it's like, why are you not working on the gut? But some of them, like B12, you need to get from your food and absorb that. I think I'm saying that accurately. But there's a lot of Bs out there, and some people are sensitive to B12 and they're okay with B9. And in the methylation world, a lot of people that are trying to solve their methylation puzzles get worse because they take the wrong things and they're like, man, I got anxiety, insomnia, things like that. But the short answer is give them B vitamins and see if their numbers come down.
Seems like for you with hypothyroid and probably with most things is letting the labs tell the story and making sure we're ordering the right labs for what your symptom profile is.
Yes, letting the labs, or what I tell people, Ryan, is we wanna see subjective improvement or objective improvement. If somebody takes a B complex that I give them and they're like, "What was that? I feel better." I'm like, "Boom, we hit something." And not like problem solved, but like, "Okay, let's keep on that one." It clearly is working for you if you feel better and you're like, "Boy, my energy is crazy," you know? And quite frankly, like, I've seen more of that happen with non-methylated Bs than with methylated Bs. You know, I heard this dude yesterday, he was like, "You need to take a methylated B because it's better absorbed." And I'm like, "You just heard that somewhere." Like, it is, the methylated Bs are, further down the action line of, like, MTHFR, of, like, methyl tetrahydrofolate is what MTHFR is for. But as far as the clinical application and helping people, we either wanna see subjective improvement or objective improvement. Meaning if you take a B vitamin and your MCV doesn't come down, well, we gotta get your MCV down. That's the point. Or your homocysteine doesn't come down. Well, your homocysteine still have it. Homocysteine's a heart attack risk marker, it's a Alzheimer's risk marker, it damages arteries, and it's lowered by B vitamins and methylation processes. So if it's high, I'm like, I don't care which brand you take, we gotta get your homocysteine down. And so that's more what our goals are, but it's subjective improvement and objective improvement because we might not be retesting that often because there's a cost perspective and things like that too. But absolutely, and we're looking for also, right, in the short term, middle term, long term, we're looking for, like, which vitamin D is like, you take more, the levels come up. But how much? Sometimes 2 people take the same dosage and one of them doubles and one of them goes up 5 points. But same thing with the, uh, um I guess, what I was trying to say, I guess, is, like, looking for what are recurrent themes. If your homocysteine was high in 2024 and it's high in 2025 and it's still high in 2026, it's like, this is a recurrent theme and we need to work on it and see how we can get that to come down. Even though it might not solve all your problems from a symptom standpoint, we gotta get that number down because it's just not good that it's high.
And in that short, intermediate, and long term, what does diet look like in that time period? What are you recommending for people?
That's another great question. It's nuanced again because the majority of people that I see have sensitivities beyond just, like, avoid gluten. They've got FODMAP or histamine or, like, "Oh, I'm bloated all the time," or, like, "Oh, I've had diarrhea for a year," or all those things. They've got symptoms, but I'll tell you in general, gluten is public enemy number 1 for thyroid. I've saw somebody recently and she's like, "Well, I know gluten's a problem because when I get off of it, my TSH comes down, and when I get on it, my TSH goes up, and when I get off it, my TSH comes back down." I'm like, "Boom, okay, so guess what I'm
How
gonna
our
tell
lab
you?"
work.
Yeah, and then I'm like, "Guess what? I don't need to tell you what to do. You just told me what you need to do. Don't eat gluten." But gluten is public enemy number 1. There's other foods that can cross react with gluten. So dairy, corn, oats, rice, millet, maybe not rice, yeast. But there's like 6 or 7 foods that can cross react with dairy. So in what or with gluten, excuse me. But I'm more of a fan of like grain free. Like if you're gonna go gluten free, just go grain free. So like this lady again this morning, she had gluten on her sensitivity. She had millet and she had dairy and eggs, and I was like, just do an egg free paleo diet. And I told her, I said, one of the reasons I say that is because it's an easy search term. You go to Google and you type in egg free paleo breakfast ideas, you're gonna get 1,000 ideas in 5 seconds. And then her test also had like banana and red wine and some other things. I said, you might need to do more than this, but egg-free paleo diet is just real easy search term. So I love a paleo diet in general because it's easy search term, and there's a million Pinterest boards and like, there's books out there, there's tons of stuff that's paleo friendly, but avoiding triggers. Another thing that's in general is if somebody tolerates it, if somebody has no gut symptoms, high fiber. High fiber and high variety, because somebody might eat 2 salads a day, but they don't get a lot of variety. So the fiber variety is crucial for the microbiome. Crucial for the microbiome. So, and then I'm like moderate, glycemic index. It might not be low carb, it might not be keto, but it's just like don't be spiking your blood sugar either. But diet wise is always changing. Now, another thing too, Ryan, that, again, maybe not for thyroid specific, but a lot of people I see at the beginning, I'm like, you need to eat regularly and often because you don't do good with blood sugar drops, and that's more of an adrenal thing too. So I'm like, you need to eat. It's called metronome eating. I learned that from a teacher of mine, Eric Dorninger, who's awesome. He's out of Boulder, but he calls it metronome eating, which is like tick 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 tick, and doing it with rhythm and regularity every day to avoid blood sugar drops and to set your circadian rhythms with that. But then let's say we do that for a month. And then somebody comes in and they're like, "I'm doing a lot better energy-wise." I'm like, "Hey, maybe you try skipping breakfast. Maybe you try doing some more intermittent fasting," and I'm not, I've got a lot of experience with keto and fasting and things like that. I've had people do 28-day fasts, et cetera.
Oh,
But,
that's
I'm
crazy.
not I'm not pushing everybody towards that by any means. Uh, a lot of times when we work on somebody's blood sugar, because a lot of people come into me and they're like, "I could never fast. I'm gonna die if I fast." And then a month later, they come in or 2 months later, and they're like, "Guess what I'm doing? I'm fasting." And I'm like, "I told you you'd be able to." So that we get that energy a little bit more stable, and then they're able to go miss a meal without feeling like they tank or crash. But a lot of times at the beginning, I'm like, "No, you need to eat more often right now, and then get your metabolism back on track, get your adrenals and energy back on track, and then maybe we can utilize some of these strategies like going lower carb or doing some intermittent fasting and do them strategically so we don't tank the thyroid. Because that's another thing too, is that keto and low carb can tank the thyroid because the body thinks it's starving. And so it slows down the metabolic rate. So you don't burn off. It's like if you think you're going broke, you don't want to burn off all your money. So you slow down your spending rate. So, that those things are all intimately involved with the thyroid and the metabolic rate that thyroid controls. But that's how I handle diet is like there's general advice. I mean, it's kinda like the short, middle, and long term. There's general advice that everybody should follow. But then most of the people I see can't follow that because they eat broccoli and they feel like they're gonna explode, or they eat, tomatoes and they have diarrhea because it's histamine or whatever it is. There's sometimes a lot of nuance to that, but otherwise, if somebody's gut's doing pretty good, then it's like high fiber, low glycemic, anti-inflammatory, high variety. Those are some of my foundational focuses.
Two of the symptoms that just from personal experience of the people I know in my life with hypothyroid that they experience is hair loss and anxiety. What's going on
Lots of stuff.
there?
The hair loss is again like just metabolic rate. Things slow down. Your gut slows down, your brain slows down, your healing processes slow down. So, and hair loss from a symptom standpoint, Ryan, is like a super tricky symptom. Like there's autoimmunity, like alopecia, there's thyroid, there's iron, like not too much, not too little, but both can cause that. And so there could be oxidative stress, there could be all these different mechanisms. I don't I would say the metabolic rate is the main thing, but there's this involvement with, if somebody has hypothyroidism, it's like, why do you have hypothyroidism in the first place? You've got more inflammation, you've got more oxidative stress. The thyroid produces, I don't know if this relates to your question as far as the hair, but the thyroid produces more reactive oxygen species per gram of tissue than any other tissue in your body, and it's particularly susceptible because of that to toxins. Particularly susceptible to toxicities and different things like fluorides and things of that family play a particularly important role with the thyroid because they can compete with iodine receptors and things like that. But going back to the hair loss, now the anxiety is another one, Ryan, that's like that is a hallmark symptom of hyper because you got too much thyroid and your brain's like vroom, 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 vroom. It's like, ah. But in hypo, it's like, well, why would I have anxiety when everything's slowed down? And that I would say is a reflection of inflammation. Inflammation, oxidative stress. Anxiety is probably the single most common symptom that walks into my office. So it's
Anxiety
that
is
what?
anxiety is the single most common
Yeah,
symptom?
yeah, I think that's safe to say. So, but not everybody has thyroid issues. A lot of people have their thyroid looks perfect, or they've got, eczema, they've got psoriasis, they've got some other autoimmune condition, and they've got anxiety. Well, why? Because body inflammation drives brain inflammation. Gut inflammation drives both of those. So when your body's more inflamed, whether that be from toxins or it be from gluten or it be from an infection or it be from a donk on the head or whatever it is, when the body's more inflamed, the brain's more likely to be inflamed. And so I think of that with the anxiety. I think of depression being a part of it too. But depression might also be if you're low thyroid, your brain's just not functioning fast. You're like, "Bzz, I feel sluggish. I feel like Eeyore. I'm just kind of dragging. But if the brain is inflamed, you feel pretty crummy. You feel depressed. You feel sad. You feel anxious. You can't stop thinking about things. You can ruminate on things. So I think of those things just like, I don't know that they're necessarily caused by thyroid. The hair loss is caused by thyroid. You cut somebody's thyroid out, they're gonna start losing hair, in clumps. But the anxiety, I think, is more a side effect of whatever's underlying, with the inflammation, the oxidative stress, the autoimmune progression, or whatever it may be. Um, More so than like, oh, this is why you're anxious, your thyroid's 2.0. But the hair loss be like, oh, this is why you're losing hair, your thyroid's 2.0. So, and thyroid, what it does too is again metabolic rate. It speeds up metabolism of your mitochondria so they can produce more ATP. And that's energy, that's cellular energy. So you need cellular energy for every process in your body. Hypothyroidism is associated with every symptom, but if you don't have, and then your body, if you don't have a lot of energy, it's going to prioritize the most important things. Like it's important to keep your heart beating and your lungs breathing and your brain thinking, and it's not important to keep your hair growing. So it's going to slow down some of those things that are really, 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 really bothersome to people. They're like, "I don't care if my brain is sluggish, but my hair, oh, my poor hair." Like, that's the things that bring people in, and they're like, I take Nutrafol, I've taken biotin, I'm doing all these things for my hair." And I'm like, "Oh, your vitamin D is 14 and you got yeast in your gut." It's like, so they're just kinda missing sometimes the targets. And not saying any of those things are bad. I'm just saying, like, don't start with Nutrafol. Start with the low hanging fruit, and then that might be more effective. Yeah.
I think that that is great advice for people because I think that a lot of people, their first thing that they do is Nutrafol.
Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of the supplements that are the most well advertised are the crappiest. Now, because Nutrafol's on like, like tonight the USA plays World Baseball Classic. There might be a Nutrafol ad on the outfield,
Yeah, they're everywhere.
fence. They're
They're
everywhere, and then there's some others too in the supplement world. I'm trying to think of some others that are well advertised, but those are the ones that people come into me and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I tried Nutrafol, my hair got worse. I lost more hair." I'm like, "Oh, okay." I'm sure it's helped millions of people or thousands of people or whatever. I'm sure it's not all bad, but these are the people that I see that they've already tried some of the more obvious things. They Googled, "Why is my hair falling out?" and they started taking Nutrafol, and they tried that for 3 months, and then they're coming to me. Um, yeah.
So let's moving on to the I guess you would call it hypothyroid or the Hashimoto's, but good labs. What would you call that?
And I don't know if I'm using the term properly, but there's a term called euthyroid, which is
Okay, you.
like, yeah, yeah, like everything. I think that like everything looks normal, but you still have all the thyroid symptoms. I've also heard it said some people. Uh, Here's what happens with autoimmunity: is that autoimmunity will attack the thyroid. And if that attack lasts long enough, the thyroid will be damaged. But a lot of people that attack hasn't damaged the thyroid yet. So they've got these elevated antibodies, and the antibodies are what indicate that there's an attack process going. Now, let me talk about that for a sec too, because I'm a little bit in the middle right now of like my traditional understanding of it from Dr. Karazian and some of my mentors is like thyroid antibodies don't matter. Now, what do I mean by that? They matter because they diagnose Hashimoto's. But when they go up, it doesn't mean you're worse. And when they go down, it doesn't really mean that you're better. It's still an important marker. Like I'm still tracking what my antibodies are doing right now. Cause I think if they go down, it's like, it's gotta be a sign that it's better. Like what if they go down to 0? Then I don't have Hashimoto's anymore. And that's remission. But I think that the point of what they're saying is that in other autoimmunities, like even in Graves', it does matter because the antibody is binding to the receptor and it's stimulating that receptor. And so that receptor is always turned on. Or the same thing with the OCD or PANS pandas. Like you bind a dopamine receptor and you're telling the body like that key is in that lock at all times. And it's like revving up these certain processes. Thyroid antibodies don't do that. They bind to these proteins. So there's 2 Hashimoto's antibodies. They're called TPO antibody, thyroid peroxidase, which is also called microsomal antibody for some reason, like on the MyCharts labs or things like that. So you look through your MyCharts. And the other one's called TG, thyroglobulin. And again, off the top of my head, I'd have to like look back, but like TPO, they both do major things with the iodine import of iodine into the thyrocyte and then attachment of iodine. And then, there's also the cleavage of iodine, which is like T4 stands for 4 iodines. And then that gets converted to T3. So one of them gets cleaved, cut off. And then you got 3 iodines, and that's T3, and that's active thyroid hormone. So that's why iodine is really important. And I'll say this too, again, I'm rambling, maybe not answer your question directly, but worldwide, the number one cause of hypothyroidism is iodine deficiency. So iodine matters. But in the US, iodine deficiency is very rare. So in the US, the number one cause of hypothyroidism is Hashimoto's, like 80%. So iodine matters. Those antibodies matter. I don't even remember what you asked now, but you can measure those antibodies. And I'll tell you this too, and you're about to tell me, but sometimes I've seen people that are like, their antibodies are like 2,000. And they're like, really? I have Hashimoto's? Wow, I feel fine and I'm skinny. And I go to the gym every day and my hair's great. And then other people, their antibodies are like 35. And they're like, I feel like death. I cannot get out of bed in the morning. So I think that those antibody levels matter. They tell us that there's an autoimmune process occurring, but they don't necessarily mean like higher is worse, lower is better. But I do think that your trends are important. But ask me again what you asked me, right? Because I forgot. I just rambled about it. But it was like that euthyroid, or that like your labs look normal, but you have Hashi's. I think that's what you asked about.
Yep. I think I just asked the name of what it was
Oh,
called. I
okay.
think I don't even remember.
Well, it doesn't matter. Hopefully that was
I was
helpful
too
for
locked
somebody.
into
But
what you were saying.
that's also where my thyroid has been at in the past. Was like, oh crap, I got Hashimoto's, but my levels are fine. So it was like, oh crap, okay, I got Hashimoto's, I got autoimmunity.
So
I'm
what
gonna
do you
learn
do in that situation? Like for that person?
everything that I do for anybody anyway, and
Yep.
just, with autoimmunity, and I learned this again from a mentor of mine, Dr. Tom Colton, he's a thyroid expert. He talks about, like, he says he has 5 scratchers, he has 5 fingers. And he's like, if you scratch, it feels good at first, but if you keep scratching, eventually you're going to damage your hand, you're going to be bleeding. So he's like, what's the answer to that? Stop scratching. So what are the scratchers? What are the 5 fingers? It's food and gut, it's toxins, it's stress, it's hormone fluctuations, and it's hidden infections. So all those. Now going back to, again, women versus men, the hormone fluctuations, that's what women have more than we do. I don't got a lot of fluctuations in mine, but puberty is a common time for autoimmunity to present itself. Pregnancy is a very common time for autoimmunity to present itself, and perimenopause is another one. And out of those 3, Ryan, you and I only get one of them. We get puberty. We don't ever get pregnant. We don't ever hit menopause. So we don't have that risk factor with the hormone fluctuations. But that's what we do. If somebody has an autoimmune process anywhere, it's like, hey, you have an autoimmune process. Let's work on decreasing the things that drive an autoimmune process. So, getting out of toxic exposure, fixing your foods and gut, looking into it with testing, looking at hidden infections. Do you have, Epstein-Barr virus that's reactivated? Do you have biofilms? Do you have strep? Do you have Klebsiella, Pseudomonas, whatever, mycoplasma? Do you have these infections or a high pathogen burden that we need to reduce? But those are my favorites, is the people that come to me with autoimmunity, and it's like, we want to calm down the autoimmune process no matter what, but we're not really focusing on the thyroid gland. We're focusing on the autoimmunity, and all the other podcasts that I have about TH1 and TH2 and, autoimmune, T cells and things like that, that all plays into these people. They just don't have to go on thyroid med because they're not hypothyroid yet, but we take the exact same approach.
Got you. Yeah. So and it seems like it's a similar approach to how you do most things, which is
It
let's
is.
take these
What
labs,
it
let's
is,
do
but I don't want that to sound generic, but it is. I mean, it's like
well, because it's
you
the
got
opposite of generic though, because it's like,
exactly.
let's look at what's going on. Let's do a intake form, and we'll see, and we'll let that dictate what labs we need to do, and then we'll let the labs dictate what our approach is, whether that is diet, supplement, and everything else.
100%. Or the symptoms too. If somebody's like, my gut is perfect. I have a, perfect bowel movement every day and I'm never bloated or constipated, but I've been menstrually bleeding for the last 50 days. Like, okay, let's start with your hormone. Where the symptoms guide us to what's the most urgent and most important one. The trickiest one of all, Ryan, dead serious, is toxins, because people come in with dysfunction, and dysfunction is a sign of toxicity. But it's not like, oh, this toxin causes fatigue, this toxin causes hair loss, this toxin causes this. It's like toxins just drive dysfunction, and they're a little trickier to test for, but detoxification is on my radar for everybody. And sometimes we might find a toxin in somebody's body that is more particularly dangerous for the thyroid, like perchlorate. Perchlorate is one that's, I don't even remember the details of perchlorate, but it could be in water, and it can be particularly damaging to the thyroid. Or sometimes it might be like, I don't know, there's other toxins that might come from dry cleaning, or might come from, PCBs that are chlorinated what are they? I don't remember the names now, but they're like, they could compete with iodine receptors. So anything in the fluoride or chloride, family, the halides, I believe it is like particularly important for iodine. And iodine is particularly important for the thyroid. So, but heavy metals are important, mold toxins are important, but detox is sometimes the trickiest one to just say, let's test for it right away. But yes, that we do take a similar approach to everybody, whether it's rheumatoid arthritis or it's Hashimoto's or it's lupus. I'm treating them about the same. As like, what do you
Yep.
need?
It's
What
a
do you
nuance,
need? Let's look at your nuance, but also, yeah, what do you need? But gut, toxins, stress,
personalized
hormones,
and
infections.
nuanced.
Yep.
So last piece of the puzzle is hyperthyroid. And I know it's not as common, but what
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, well, if somebody has Graves, then they could have antibodies that bind the receptor, and it's stimulating the thyroid to produce hormones. So the thyroid's being told to produce hormones, and so it's doing what it's told. And so we got to shut off that signal too. But you can also, a lot of times, if somebody's been hyper, it could be a sign of Hashi's. In Hashimoto's, the thyroid will go up and down and up and down. And so when the thyroid gets damaged, it spills out thyroid hormone. It dumps out thyroid hormone. So you're hyper because you're dumping out thyroid hormone. And then that thyroid hormone gets metabolized and used up, and then you're hypo because of the damage. So in Hashi's, depending on when you take the snapshot, the TSH could be normal, the TSH could be high, the TSH could be low. And so in somebody, going back to your last question, if I see somebody with Hashi's, that thyroid is perfectly normal, I'm like, this still matters. And it might just be a snapshot in time of if it was just their TSH, it might just be a snapshot in time, but sometimes hyper can be Hashimoto's 100%, and this is well known in the literature of, like, thyroid damage causes temporary, I think they call it transient thyrotoxicosis, which means you are dumping thyroid hormone, but it's transient. It's not gonna last forever. It's just because I just, opened your tire and your tire's spilling out air. But then your tire's gonna be flat by the when that air's all gone, you know? So, that is sometimes with Graves', but otherwise, it's just an autoimmune process. Now, I'll tell you again maybe 1 or 2 stories, but one that always stands out to me is this girl that came in, and this is like the I can remember when it was because it was like COVID, because she was scheduled to get her thyroid removed. She was young, she was relatively healthy. She might have just had a baby, like, a year before, there's like a there's like a it was Graves, and they were like, "We're gonna take your thyroid out." And long story short, in this part of it, they had her thyroid removal scheduled, but it got postponed because of COVID. So it, like, bought us a little time. It bought us, like, a month or 2, and when she came in, I was like, "Hey, you're about to get your thyroid removed. You better work like heck on this." And I was like, "You need to do an AIP diet right away." So she went AIP right away. And she acted on all this. And long story short, she never got her thyroid removed. She's still doing great. I still talk to her and still know her, and she's still doing great. But we bought a little time, but she did an AIP diet right away. We tested her gut. I forget what else we tested, blood lab wise or whatever. But we started working on some of these things. And the takeaway is that she still has her thyroid, right? But there's
It's an
other
important note.
people.
It's a very
Yeah,
important note.
that's exactly. But I don't. A lot of these people, it's like I don't remember what we did. But because we did a bunch of stuff,
Yeah,
but
it's
it
in the
worked,
file. It's in the file
and it was in
somewhere.
the file, and it worked, and it's like she's happy, and then she's probably referred her friends, that's how my practice grows and works is like, people have success in their journey, and then they tell their friends, and they tell their family or whatever, but that's long story short. Another person, well, I can't remember the details of this story, but another one, and the only reason that I'm even thinking of this one, right, is 'cause I see this girl's daughter now. I don't really see the mom hardly ever, but I saw the daughter, and I'll tell you, this person had hyper, and maybe it was hypo too, but this person, the mom, she had, like I think she had 3 or 4 parasites. Like, she's one of the most we've ever most maybe the most that I've ever seen as far as, like, not 1 parasite, but it's like, "Oh, you got 3, that's odd," and so we're looking for what do people have and what do we have to do, and then we can see their symptoms improve. Like, if their, temperature regulation and their metabolism and their sleep and anxiety improve right away, it's a good sign that we're making progress. And then so that might be month 1, it's like, let's work on your symptoms and let's work on the low hanging fruit. And then month 2 might be like, okay, now we're working on your gut. And the whole time we're doing maybe AIP diet, but then we're working on, like, what we found in your gut labs, like, okay, we need to pull weeds in your gut, we need to plant seeds in your gut, if you got 4 parasites, we better be pulling weeds in your gut, but most people don't have that, so it might be, like, pull weeds, plant seeds, microbiome work is what I mean when I say that. But, um, yeah, and again, I don't even remember this is it's funny because this woman was, like, suffering real bad when we met her. And now she's, like, pretty good enough to the point where, like, we mostly talk about her daughter now, but I don't remember what we did or what her timeline was, but I've seen, other people like that, but Graves, comes across my office, like, occasionally, or true hyper. Hypo is, like, 6 people a week probably, or,
Crazy.
thyroid stuff is a lot, but, yeah, I don't have anything else. Now the other thing I would say that we sometimes use is, like, there is a antioxidant lotion that Apex makes. It's called Super Oxycell, and again, Karazian formulates it, but I'll have people rub that directly on their thyroid because it's like, yeah, we want antioxidants in your whole body. So we might be taking glutathione or vitamin C or whatever, but it's like, we want it right on that, and it's direct
Mm.
absorption, it's
And
direct,
is that for hyper,
either.
both? Okay,
Either. Just
interesting.
thyroid damage. If something's damaging the thyroid, we wanna calm down that damage,
Do you sell
whether
that
it's not.
online or is that
Oh,
only in the
yeah.
we'll put the
Well
links
well,
We do.
Great question, Ryan. But Apex, who knows why, but I mean, I understand why, but we can't sell Apex products online very clearly. It's behind a password protected firewall and things like that, because you got to be working with me for us to at least for us to post about Apex supplements or for us to
Okay,
sell
because
them.
they're
Now,
practitioner grade.
if we private label them, we could post about them and sell them. So we private label some Apex supplements, but that super oxycell, I use it like in, 4 people a year maybe. Um, Whereas some of their other products, I use it in 4 people a week. So we private label those. But that super oxycell is something you can look up and, you can buy it on Amazon. It's going to be like 4 times more expensive, but you can get it through my store. You can get it through my online store. It just might not be front and center when you go to the homepage because there's
Okay.
some more
We'll put
rules with Apex.
the link in the description, essentially.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. It's not
Awesome.
impossible to find. You just might have to jump through some hoops, but we can help you if you want it.
We can help you do that.
Yeah, and
Alrighty.
another one, so that's one a little more obscure. And then and I don't know, you didn't ask this, Ryan, but it's like, what are some of the tools that I use? It's like that. There's other thyroid, supports thyroid glandulars. There's about 3 or 4 that we use depending on the pattern type. If it's a conversion pattern, I'm using a supplement to support thyroid conversion. If it's a pituitary pattern, I'm using a different product that supports the pituitary. If it's just the straight up hypothyroidism, I'm using a different product to support the thyroid in general with the glandular, or if it's thyroid inflammation. So there's 4 things right there that I commonly rotate in or out depending on the type of pattern. And then the et ceteras are like vitamin D, B vitamins, omega 3s, the gut stuff, all the things we've already mentioned. And then the last one that I sometimes use, and this isn't one that I necessarily sell or encourage people because I don't have an easy way to be like, this is what you should do. But I've been using myself a red light on my thyroid, and I want to see what it does. I'm into the idea, I'm into the concept, I'm into the mechanism and the science, and I've heard people out there that are like, "Oh, I used a red light, and my antibodies went away." I'm like, "Really?" Sometimes I hear things, and because I've seen hundreds of people do hundreds of things, I'm like, I don't know if that's true. I believe that it worked for you, but if you did that in 100 people and it worked 100 times, I'm sold. But I just don't believe that it would work 100 times repeatedly. But it's an easy thing to do. So I've got a red light device that's like the size of my thyroid, and I do that, and I'm trying to see what happens with my numbers. Again, my numbers improved from January to February. And it wasn't that drastic, but they're trending in the right direction. So now I'm kinda like, let's see from February to March if they keep trending in the right direction, or what do we have to do? Because everybody and everything, Ryan, and again, this is me too, I like to go hard on things, but we also try to solve things with the minimum effective dosage. So if I can, solve my thyroid without giving up gluten, heck yeah, I'm gonna. But I've given up gluten. So I'm not trying that, but if I could solve my thyroid without taking 25 million supplements every day, heck yeah, I want to, but it might mean I'm still taking a couple, but the minimum effective treatment is what we want. Now, sometimes that might be 5 things for the gut and 3 things for the thyroid, and that's the minimum effective treatment. You got to be doing all of them. But as that healing goes up, the supplements should come down. So that's when it goes back to the short term, middle term, and long term goals. If we're doing everything in all 3 of those, people are going to be on 12 supplements a day, and they're going to hate me, and they're going to burn out financially, and they're going to get supplement fatigue. So it might be like, hey, let's do this first. And then when you've got a fire, this is your extinguisher. And then let's do these things for the next 60 days and see what your numbers do. And then let's come back to your gut. That's the art of what we do, is like not trying to shoot at all the targets at once and hoping for the machine gun approach, is like you're bound to hit something, but more like sniping in on something and be like, for the next 30 days, this is our goal. And let's retest at the end of 30 days and see if we're trending in the right direction, and then move on to a different goal or keep working on that one too. But that's how we piece things together in the short term, middle term, and especially the long term.
And for those that don't know, just to end this conversation here, could you just give like a high picture oversight of like your own thyroid journey?
Yeah. So first, I found hypothyroidism in my dad. And my dad was like me, which is scary because my dad's dead, but he was like, had no symptoms. no signs, healthy, like active, like could run a 5K at, 65 years old. Now he died of cancer, so obviously nobody wants that. But from a health standpoint and from a lab standpoint, he was like pretty picture perfect, which is also, sad. But he had Hashis, and then I was like, "Oh, you have Hashimoto's," and he's like, "What? Oh, okay." But then I found out myself. And once I started doing lab work, 10 years ago or whatever, and I started getting in the functional world, I did it on myself and I had Hashi, but my thyroid looked perfect. So I would call it an incidental finding, but it led me down the rabbit hole of like, I want to learn everything there is to know about thyroid and about autoimmunity. That's what started my progression that led me to here. I got an autoimmune based podcast that sells autoimmune people, but that's kind of what started it. Was like I was already into wellness. I was already teaching nutrition and detox and doing chiropractic and stuff like that. And then I found this autoimmunity and I was like, oh, okay, I need to learn everything there is to know about autoimmunity. And I did, or I tried to. I still do. I'm still really into it. But my journey's been really uneventful until the last couple months. So in the last couple months, now I got an actual problem to solve. So now I'm actually working on it. And so my thyroid journey isn't as eventful as, a lot of people where they're like, oh, I was suffering, I was struggling, I had all these symptoms. Even when I found my hypothyroidism or when I had hypothyroidism in the last 3 months, like I said already, I felt pretty sick and good. Skiing, coaching hockey, coaching basketball, coaching baseball, pretty active. I wouldn't call myself lethargic. I'm like, I get tired. I got 3 little kids and I'm in my 40s and you'll understand it someday, Ryan. But but then once I found it, I was like, man, am I tired? Like, man, I could take I could take a nap right now. Is that my thyroid? Like, yeah, maybe I am more tired than I thought, And I do think in January I probably was more tired than February and March. And right now I'm like, vroom, vroom, like get out of my way. I got a ton of energy. But um, it was a little more incidental that led me down this path, and I'm grateful for that, uh, but I haven't suffered a terrible amount with those things. My own personal suffering has come more from mold and the things I went through when I was living in mold and anxiety and nasal polyps and had to go to the ER and all these steroids and different things. That was more my health journey. It wasn't like a thyroid crisis. It was like a mold toxicity crisis. But I already knew I had Hashis before that. So it wasn't like the mold created my Hashis, but I think that it probably, I don't know. It's like mold probably
Exactly.
contributed to it. But yeah, so that's my thyroid journey and kind of where I'm at with it now too. And the other thing too that, for people that follow us, follow me, follow us on Instagram, things like that, I haven't talked about it that much yet. And I've told you, Ryan, I'm planning, I want to talk about it, but I want to see the success first and then be like, here's how I got my numbers down or I got them up and whatever. And again, they're trending in the right direction. January. uh, the other thing with labs too, that we don't talk about that often is like 90% of my labs were perfect. And that's the case with almost everybody I see. So sometimes you forget to celebrate the wins. It's like, hey, 90% of these labs are perfect. We are talking about the 10% that aren't. We're talking about where there are levers that we could pull. But my cholesterol, my vitamin D, a lot of my labs were like literally perfect. But I had elevated liver enzymes and I had thyroid markers. So I stopped drinking. My liver enzymes are now normal. They're perfectly fine when I retested. And my thyroid levels, I started doing red light, started doing supplements, went completely gluten free. Honestly, my liver and my thyroid is like if I had one culprit, I'd be like beer, because gluten, alcohol kind of combined, and I was drinking beer, which for years I did not drink any beer because I was gluten free. And I've just loosened the reins in the last couple of years. But now I'm back on no gluten and I haven't had any. Maybe a little bit here and there, but very, 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 very little over the last 3 months. But anyway, that's kind of where I'm at in my journey. And so I will share more. I will share because I'm not like
Hiding.
hiding it. I don't mind being transparent with it, but I just would rather share the success after I've seen the success rather than share the journey while I'm going through it because I'm not really struggling. I'm just working on things. It's kind of like my golf game. It's not struggling that bad, but it could be better and I'm working on it.
As always. Well, great. And if you guys want us to do like a full episode on Dr. Taylor's full health journey from all the stuff he dealt with from mold and the thyroid and like his exact process of the labs he did and the supplements he took and all that fun stuff, diet wise, what he did. Let us know because that could be a whole separate hour and a half conversation of us just deep dive in Dr. Taylor's story because
Yeah.
there's a lot of fun stuff there to uncover.
Well, and I love talking about it too, Ryan, because, it's like literally my own life. But one of the things that I'm careful of in my podcast and in my Instagram and things like that is like, I'm not trying to act like I am somebody that I'm not. And I'm not trying to act like I'm this, biohacker that wakes up every morning and jumps in the cold plunge and then meditates for 30 minutes and then, works out all day long and, makes all of his own, grows all of his own food and all those things. We do all those things. Been in the health space for a long time. So a lot of these things we just kind of do. We kind of avoid toxins and eat clean and things like that. But even, with 3 little kids, like tonight, I'm going to the Blackhawks game with my son and we ain't eating gluten-free paleo. I'll eat
Yeah.
gluten-free, but he'll get some candy or something. I don't, it's like a treat, it's for his birthday. But it's just we live life also, but so I don't want to say that what I do is perfect, and I don't want to say it's not do as I say, not what I do. So I do these things, but I think that you got to be able to live life, and I think a lot of people out there are like, you can never touch gluten again. You got thyroid issues, you can never touch gluten again. It's like, well, best of luck at a birthday party or things like that. Now, you can avoid the things too. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying like you can't, but what I want is get people to the point where they can live life like normal. But if you start eating too much gluten, you start drinking too much alcohol, you start doing too much bad things, you're going to have problems again. But it's not an all or nothing thing. Again, with the nuance, like that might be a good closing point. There's a lot of shades of gray between black and white. And I think it's very easy to come onto the internet and be like, you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this. And then people do it. And they're like, I'm not any better. I'm like, well, because you don't got to do that. You gotta look at the whole system as a system and all the little pieces to it. But anyway, I'm happy to talk about my stuff as long as I throw that out there that it's like I'm not perfect and I'm not claiming to be and I'm not really asking for your, critiques either. This is just what I've learned and what I do. But yeah, I love talking about it.
No doubt. Well, thank you guys for listening to this. We are going to be consistently putting out all these type of videos. So if there's any things you guys want covered, we're reading the comments, we're listening to you guys, and we will definitely get to it. So please let us know if there's anything you want us to touch on more.
Yeah, and I'll say one other thing too. I got two upcoming podcast interviews with big names in the thyroid and autoimmune space that are just talking about, I don't know, just the different things that they are experts on, and especially from a dietary perspective. So just keep your eyes out for those interviews. Still doing the interviews too, but yeah, stay tuned for upcoming episodes.
Stay tuned. Thank you guys for listening. Catch you next time.